Hey, Choose Life Nation. This is Dallas Cohen, the Rebound Coach from the reboundcoach.com, and you are watching or listening to another episode of the Rebound Coach Live. Y'all, if you have been hanging out here any amount of time, if you are part of Choose Life Nation, that means you've survived some trauma, whether that is betrayal, uh, other kinds of trauma, episodic trauma, like something that happened, abuse, something that happened over a long time, or domestic violence, or some sort of mixture of all of that. You've experienced some trauma. And so, for all of us survivors, we get to a place where we're like, okay, now what? Like, how do I get out from here? Something horrible happened. I lived to tell the story, but man, there's not a lot of quality, or there is lacking quality in my life, and I'd like my quality of life to get better. If that's you, today is the day for you. And if this is your first time sharing virtual space with me, I want to say hello, and I want to say thank you so much for spending this virtual time with me. I know that there's a lot of places for you to be. And on the internet, there's a lot of places vying for your time and your attention. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending your time here with me. It is an honor and a privilege. If you've never heard of me before and you say, what's a rebound coach? I don't know what this is. How did this end up in my feed? I'll tell you a tiny bit about myself and how we got to this moment today. Here's the headline, guys. I was married 10 years to a man who wanted me dead. And that's not a headline from like a movie. It's a real life situation. And that didn't make a lot of sense for someone like me who had been raised in a Christian home. I had parents that loved God, loved each other, was married for a lifetime. And they were a good example of marriage and family. At the same time, I was molested from the time I was 8 to the time I was 16. And that radically affects how you see yourself. Those are identity forming years. It affects how you relate to God in a household of faith, and what God means, and how much you feel like he cares about you. And it changes how you relate to men. So fast forward, when I met the man that I married and eventually divorced, there were definitely red flags. There were reasons not to be together. There were very concerning character traits. However, as a woman of faith, I was a woman of faith then, as I am now as a praying woman. I believed God's answer was yes. And because of that, I believe that whatever came, we'd outlast it, we'd overcome it. God would swoop in and save the day and change things, and we'd be happily ever after. And all I had to do was my part, which was to wait and to pray and to do my best. And that's what I did. We got into a cycle of what I call coping and crisis. So this is where you never quite get to happy. You're never quite satisfied. You're just in this place of survival every day. You're trying not to walk on eggshells. You're trying not to blow up the landmines. You're trying to follow his rules and keep him from being angry, except the rules keep changing and you never quite succeed. And he's always angry. And it seems like there's nothing you can do. And you do all the things and none of them matter. That's where I was. We'd do that coping thing, and then there'd be a blow up. So no matter how carefully I laid out the house of cards, there'd ultimately be some sort of crisis that just knocked everything down and we'd have to start over. Well, about 10 years of that, over 9 years, almost 10 years of that, things came to a head. We had the biggest crisis we'd ever had. There was a mental health crisis for sure, which that wasn't new, but he had left for this other woman. He'd been a serial adulterer the whole time, but this time he actually left. And I found out a day later, he and that woman had been plotting my murder for months by the time I found out about it. So needless to say, that is the record scratch moment. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. How did this become my life? And you ask yourself some really serious questions, and you have some decisions to make. I had some decisions to make, and through a series of divine events, there's no other way I could describe that to you as except divine events. My life has been spared, was spared. I have the privilege of raising my children, and together we're growing and learning and unlearning and relearning and walking out a new life. And I could allow the identity that my ex-husband had planned for me to tell me who I was, to tell me how I was allowed to express my faith, how I was allowed to express my femininity, what being a woman meant, how many days I had left on the planet. He actually had a death date in mind for me that he wrote down, and a place that was important to him. So I could allow that to tell me who I was, or I could choose life. So out of that entire series of my life, I wrote a book. It's my second book. It's called I Choose Life, Rewrite Your Love Story and Change Your Legacy. And if anything in my story resonated with you, this book is for you. It is my story, but it's not just my story. It's a roadmap. It's a life map for those who've experienced something like this. Or if you thought of someone else while you were hearing my story and you thought, man, so-and-so needs to hear this. Oh gosh, that reminds me of my friend or my coworker or my family member. This book is for them. You can get this at thereboundcoach.com/book. That is thereboundcoach.com/book. You can get one of these physical copies that I will personally sign and mail to you, or you can get one from Amazon. You can get an ebook copy there as well. All of that information is at thereboundcoach.com/book. Okay, so today's topic is all about what to do next, a path to freedom for trauma survivors. So I don't know about y'all, but while we learn early on when we experience trauma, we learn how to survive, we learn how to cope. Those are instinctual. Somehow, some way, we learn how to get up every day and keep moving, and we learn how to cope. So those are two different things for me, but they're like twins or cousins or sisters, right? So I'm surviving. I have to tell myself a certain thing. So 10 years, if you've been in a domestic violence situation, and domestic violence includes things like emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse, verbal abuse, all of that. If you're in a situation like that, you've had to tell yourself a whole lot of things to be able to keep getting up and living those days. I spent a lot of those days depressed. I spent a lot of those days suicidal. I spent a lot of those days hopeless. And there has to be a certain level of survival mode and a certain level of coping to live with that, to live through that. And so we learn that pretty early and pretty easily, right? How to cope. And eventually there's an opportunity to grow past that. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to grow past it. And many people don't. Many people stay in that survival mode for the rest of their lives. And the challenge with that is survival skills are seasonal. Like you need them in the midst of the trauma, in the midst of the abuse, in the midst of the crisis that even it takes to escape a domestic violence situation or get out of an abusive situation. Like it takes a certain kind of skill. But after that, after you're out, now you need a new set of skills, growth, evolving, maturity, whatever you want to call that, thriving, blossoming, becoming the next version of yourself takes a different set of skills. So when we talk about a path to freedom for trauma survivors, survivor is that operational term that's seasonal. Okay. So being someone who's in the growth season, I want to talk about some steps for you in that season. Okay. To walk on that path to freedom. And I'll tell you this too, a path to freedom is progressive. If you're coming from the United States, we have a kind of a Western mindset that is very linear. I go from a start to a finish, right? I go from beginning to an end, or I have a journey and a destination, right? I just want to bring a different perspective to that. As opposed to a linear path of healing, there is a circular path of healing. What does that mean? That means it goes from level to level to level, or if you come from a certain corner of the spiritual world, for me, from glory to glory to glory, right? That's a vernacular. So this is progressive and it's cyclical. A path, I'm calling it a path so that you know there is progression, but really it's a journey. The path to freedom is cyclical and progressive. So you start at that survival place that we talked about. And then, okay, I'm going to do more than survive. I'm going to thrive. Well, what does that mean? Is that a destination? No, it's a journey. It's a direction. Thriving is a direction that you head as opposed to a destination that you reach. So you get it at this next level, and then there's a new level, and you may be taking the same steps, and you may get frustrated saying, gosh, I did that already. Why do I have to do that again? Because you are in a new place. So even though the step is the same, you are different. Your place, your emotional place, your spiritual place is different. And so the same steps get you higher and higher and higher in your path. Okay. So this week, this is Passover week, Pesach week. So if you celebrate Passover, happy Passover. We're a few days into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And Passover is my favorite of the biblical feast days because it holds just significant meaning to me and for me. And it was my favorite even before everything happened with my marriage. But after that, it especially held deep meaning for me. And I'll tell you some of the things that we honor in Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Number one, the end of bondage. This is a commemoration of the story of the Israelite people in ancient times that came out of Egypt. 430 years of bondage they were in. Generational, we talk about trauma, generational trauma, generational bondage, okay? To go from 430 years of that to being set free. So that's one thing it commemorates. Number two, supernatural rescue from God. If you remember the story in Exodus, there were 10 plagues that plagued the Egyptian people while their leader refused to let the Jews go free. And then number three, the rebirth of a people. After all that supernatural shakedown, the people were set free and they had an opportunity to be reborn. So I want to talk a little bit about that because it represents our path to freedom as trauma survivors as well. I remember very clearly the first Passover we got to celebrate in our new home that was away from all the drama that we had just survived, all the trauma that we had just survived. And it was very, very much those things for us. It was the end of a certain level of bondage, that spiritual oppression, that spiritual and religious abuse that had just plagued my marriage and my life and that home that we lived in. It was just so full of oppression. And we were free from that bondage for the first time for me, for almost 10 years, right? Also having a supernatural rescue from God. Y'all, I can't even begin to tell you, because people ask all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, how did you find out? And what did he do? And what did you do? And how did that happen? Y'all, there's so much. I literally had to write a book. I didn't have to. I had the opportunity to. But there's so much, and I couldn't possibly explain it in any length of time that I get to be on like a video with you or podcast or something. Like, it's so much. And every step of it was incredibly supernatural. Every step of it, y'all. There's no way like happenstance could have done it. Like, it was so divine. And so I want to be able to share that with you. Supernatural rescue from God. Also the rebirth of a people. We were a little family of 3. We went from a family of 4 to a family of 3. And while it was never, ever, ever something that I wanted, I didn't want that version of family for us. I'm so incredibly grateful. That we get to live as a family of 3. It has been such a tremendous, tremendous blessing and continues to be. And so it was the birth of us as a family. And so my story definitely connects with this. And many people who've lived through betrayal or trauma or abuse also can identify with having a rescue from bondage, a supernatural rescue and then having a rebirth as a person, as a family, as a mom, as a woman, right? A rebirth. But what are some lessons that we can gain, or I would say steps in your path, Steps is not the air quote, path is the air quote. Steps in your path to freedom. So what are some things we can glean from the Passover story that applies to us as survivors of trauma? Okay. So if you've been here, if you've been watching or listening to the Rebound Coach Live, you know I like my 3 points. I've got 4 today. Okay. 4 steps on our path to freedom. They're in no particular order, but number 1, thinking about, reflecting on what do you need freedom from? Okay. What beliefs are there, limiting beliefs you need freedom from? Are there oppressive situations? Okay. Were you in a situation like mine that was just oppressive? Like you felt like I know that I felt like there was a boa constrictor around my neck that just kept getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it was harder and harder to breathe. And I didn't have any hope, right? Are you in a situation like that? Or are there negative patterns that you need to be free from? That you're like, man, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of having this addiction. I'm tired of not being productive. I'm tired of being depressed. I'm tired of being overwhelmed. I'm tired of being tired, right? Like we live our lives exhausted. That's not a way to live. We don't get the days back, right? So considering, what do you need to be free from? Okay, where are you in that cycle? That's step 1. Step 2, I'm going to say yes. What does that mean? Okay, so the Israelites, God fought their battles in more than one occasion, right? But in the Passover story, God literally sent like 10 plagues. First of all, God sent a mouthpiece. That's number 1. Someone to advocate for them in their governmental courts. Number 2, God backed up that advocate with like crazy stuff that happened, like big earth to them, like, they're earth-wide, they're land-wide situations that God says, no, I'm in charge, I'm on their side, and I'm going to kick your butt. Like all of that was happening. Okay. So after all of that, then when Pharaoh said, okay, y'all can go and bless me, and like, here, take some jewelry with you. Once that happened, the Israelite people still had to say yes. Like, if you can imagine the trauma, the real trauma of having all the firstborn die in your city, like all the firstborn and the firstborn of cattle. Like, that's wild. It's even, dare I say, kind of petty, right? Like the cattle too, God. He was serious. But think about that, like watching that happen all around you, even if it didn't happen in your house because you had the blood of the lamb on your door. That's very traumatic. And if you can imagine the next day, it's like, okay, we got to go, and you got to hurry up, run. Don't take a lot with you. Like, we got to go. You can imagine that, like, there's a choice they had to make to say yes. And you can be like, oh, they were in bondage. Of course they'd say yes. I happen to know, and if you pay attention to statistics around domestic violence and things, you happen to know that saying yes is not the easiest thing to do, even when you're experiencing abuse and you have the opportunity to get out. That's how police get called to a house 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. In my case, I think there were 5 or 6 times in a particular year that the police were called to my house, and I didn't even realize it. I had no greater understanding, like, this keeps happening. Like, I didn't even put that together, but it was happening. And even though in each crisis I had an opportunity to reflect and I had an opportunity to make a decision to leave, it didn't even occur to me, right? So for the Israelites, when they had their opportunity to leave, they took it. They're like, yep, we're going to get up out of here. right? They didn't have compassion for the enemy. It's like, oh, maybe I'll stay and help out. They must be going through a hard time. Nope. They're like, yep, we're out of here. So when the opportunity is open, making sure you say yes. Okay. And they had to leave in a hurry. Sometimes waiting until you feel ready to make a move will cause you to miss an opportunity. They literally had to eat a meal in haste, right? First of all, they were given really specific instructions. Okay. The angel of death is going to come and take all the firstborn. And the only way you get out of it is you take a lamb, a particular kind of lamb, you slaughter it, and you put the blood on your door, and you get inside and you stay inside, you don't leave. And in the morning, it was like, y'all got to go eat this meal in haste. It's the Lord's Passover. Like, hurry up and eat it. And then get your stuff together because it's time to go, right? Very specific instructions. They didn't have to trust God. They could have been like, I don't know about all this. I don't think I'm going to do it. I'm just going to sit it out and see what happens. And what would have happened? Like, they would have lost their firstborn too, right? So it's important to, number one, when you get instructions from God, take heed. Whether you understand or not, just, I'm going to go do that, right? And then also, don't sit and wait. I know for myself and for a lot of people I get to serve, we can get into analysis paralysis and not want to make a move until I feel ready, until I feel informed, until I feel prepared. And there's a time for analyzation and research and being comfortable. There's time for that. And there's a time for, we got to go. And it's important to know the difference. So when you have the opportunity to be free from oppression, from trauma, from abuse, say yes. Also, when you have the opportunity to grow and heal and learn and be in a safe environment, also say yes. Say yes. Say yes. We have lives that are busy. We have lives that are oppressive, and sometimes not from other people, just from our own choices. We are choosing our schedule. We are choosing our glut of activities and responsibilities. We are choosing the pace that our life runs. And I know you say, I have no choice, but you do. You actually do. We do. And there's opportunities that come where it's like, hey, take 3 days and go feed your soul over at the Sanctuary Experience. Take 1 day and experience Soul Nourish Night. Like, there's opportunities that come. Say yes. Say yes. You, like I said earlier, we don't get these days back. You don't get these days back. And you can look back and all your nose to the grind, all it meant was more of the same. Or you can choose life and feed your soul and grow and be surrounded with people who care about you, who are going forward in the same direction and want to see you succeed. The choice is yours. Okay. Number 3, the identity crisis that several folks in the story of Passover went through. Number 1, Moses, for one, like, he was born Hebrew, but was raised Egyptian, and then was an outcast once he found out what was going on with him, and then spent all these years in the desert, in the Midian desert. He got himself a wife and kids, and then God was like, hold up, I need you to go back and handle some things for me. That's a lot. That's a lot to process. And then you think about the Israelite people. 430 years, that means generations. No one alive at the time of the Exodus was also alive when the people of Israel were free, right? So everybody there had been born into captivity. Can you imagine that? Being born into captivity, that was all you knew. It was all you knew was slavery. And then it's time to get up out of there. Like, imagining freedom, they'd have to imagine freedom from a place they had not yet experienced and decide to do that, right? That's an identity crisis, and vacillating between the identity of a slave and the identity of a free person. they don't even know what that meant. If you were born in slavery, you don't even know what it means to be free. You don't know what it means to make your own decisions. You don't know what it means to govern your own lives, right? To work for pay or to work for your own benefit as opposed to somebody else's. You don't even know how that works. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal to be free. Okay, so either, no matter which version you're coming from or coming out of, as you're growing in your path to freedom and learning what it feels like to be free, and you may not have even ever experienced that. For many of us, that was the longest relationship I'd ever been in. And I had abuse prior, right? Different kind of abuse, but abuse prior. So becoming a woman that walks in sovereignty, becoming a woman that relates to men differently, that's a journey, right? It's an identity shift, and it's something to be intentional about. All right. So in review, number one, what do you need freedom from? Okay. Limiting beliefs, oppressive situations, or negative patterns. Number two, say yes when the opportunity to be free or be freer appears. Say yes. Number three, your identity shifting, your identity crisis, going from a woman who has survived bondage to a woman who is walking in freedom. It's an identity shift. And number four, in remembrance. So as fantastic as the Passover story is, we wouldn't be talking about that today if it had not been an instruction in the Bible to every year remember this. Every year make your lamb. Every year eat unleavened bread. Every year clean the leaven, the puffed up bread or pride or sin. Clean that up out of your house and out of your heart. Every year do this in remembrance of me. We wouldn't be talking about this story right now. We would not have the advantage of the lessons that are in the Word of God and in the annals of history if we were not retelling the story. So think about what you've been delivered from already in this state where you are right now. What have you already been set free from? What has God already done for you? What has He already healed you of? What has He already given you the victory over? Okay, celebrate that. Be thankful for that, for what you've overcome. It's really important to remember what God's done for you. It puts you in a place of victory, and it helps you come into that new identity of freedom because you remember what God did for you. Cultivate that gratefulness, cultivate that thankful heart. It does so much for your mind and does so much for your choice making. Okay. Now, I want to give you a couple of opportunities to join me in growing and in nourishing your soul. We have an event coming up called Soul Nourish Night. It is on May 17th, which is a Friday from 6:30 p.m. in Largo, Florida. And I want to tell you a little information about that. Okay, you can find out more information about that at the reboundcoach.com/events. That is the reboundcoach.com/events. Okay, so that's coming up very shortly in a few weeks. It's actually the week after Mother's Day. So it's a really great opportunity if you are a mom to treat yourself, if you have a mom to treat her. You want to go together as a mother-daughter event. It's a really nice event. If you can imagine painting with a twist meeting spa. That's kind of the event that we're hosting. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's the first time for us doing an event like that. So you can find out all the information for it at thereboundcoach.com/events. Also, we have a special 3-day VIP healing retreat for women called Sanctuary Experience. That will be in September 20th through 22nd, 2024. And I want to share a testimony from Ms. Cheryl about her experience at Sanctuary.
Hi, my name is Cheryl from South Dakota. Prior to coming here, life had been full of a lot of changes, and I needed to reset and re-coordinate with a lot of things. While I was here, I was able to grasp that I am the King's daughter, that he had adopted me, not just temporarily but permanently, that I do have the authority of a king's kid, and a number of other things. Would I come back again? Yes. If you are stressed, needing to be recentered, please consider coming. It's a good thing.
And to find out more information about the Sanctuary Experience, please visit thereboundcoach.com/sanctuary. That's thereboundcoach.com/sanctuary. That's where you find all the information about the next Sanctuary Experience retreat. Okay. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening, for watching. Please go to the comments. Let me know what you got out of this, what you're going to apply to your life. And also share this with someone else who needs to choose life. And I will tell you this too. If you've been hanging out here, thank you so much for hanging out here. You're watching this on a social media platform. Please like and subscribe. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share this video so you can bless someone else. All right. Thank you so much again for spending this time with me. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And until next time, choose life.